Headlines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more across our divided country and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am an indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're having an absolutely wonderful morning. Indeed, let's go into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, at least 685 new coronavirus deaths and 70,265 new cases were reported in the United States on March 29th. Over the past week, there's been an average of 65,382 cases per day. That's an increase of 19% from the average 2 weeks earlier. And again, that number is now going back up. This has been started, I would say, mid last week. Yesterday it went up. Today it's going up even more. We were seeing double-digit decreases in the number of cases for weeks there, and now those cases are going back up. And that means I'm guessing deaths will be soon to follow. Sad to say, but that's the grim reality of this stuff. That is, on the other hand, if some of these cases are people who caught COVID with a vaccine, who technically tested positive, but aren't displaying extreme symptoms of the virus, in which case, the symptoms wouldn't be as bad. So not as many people would suffer the worst effects of it, but that remains to be seen. This is just a number. As of this morning, more than 30,355,300 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 549,000 have died from it. In a new joint letter, French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel have called for the creation of a new global treaty for pandemics preparation, warning that future pandemics are inevitable and that the coronavirus has been a, quote, stark and painful reminder that nobody is safe until everyone is safe, end quote. Describing the coronavirus as, quote, the biggest challenge to the global community since the 1940s, end quote. They said that a union like the one formed in the post-war era, is needed now to meet the demands imposed on the global community by the coronavirus. Jamarl, I can see the weight of that claim, but comparing this to World War II in order to create new international bodies and alliances, I don't know. It also feels a bit off base to me. That was like a singular event, and I just don't know that this rises to meet that. But it's big, and I don't want to dismiss this either. What's your take on that? It's kind of a complicated issue. What do you think?
World War II was something else unto itself. I don't think there's any comparison. I get that we always want to look back and try to give context. Because, if we're talking about something, oftentimes describing it in flat language never works. You always have to compare it to something else in order for the person to get it. If you say, I'm happy today, what does that mean? What are you typically? What is that in comparison to me? How do I know what that means? If you say, I am over the moon because Lou Elizondo said that he was going to come on the show, well, that's different, and I get it. You get context by giving a description or giving a comparison. Well, same thing with us. We look back. Why do we say it is as bad as Hitler? Hitler is our comparison of how bad things are in regards to the limits. Well, they're looking back for something to delineate or to note how important this is. But I don't think World War II works. And I don't even think the creation of international bodies and everything else is necessary to treat this. I could be wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you don't need international cooperation. But does that mean you have to create new institutions for something that should be temporary? I don't know. I don't think so. But I could be wrong. I guess I'm saying calling it World War II just seems too strong.
It does. And I don't know here's the other thing. I don't know what the international institutions would do exactly. I mean, I'll put it like this. A lot of what we saw, in some sense, was globalization, especially when it comes to the early stages of the virus. And the production of PPE, whether you're talking about that or whether you're talking about the ability of people and propensity of people to travel across national boundaries all over the world very quickly due to more modern technology, cheaper plane travel, all that stuff. A lot of what we saw was the consequences of globalization. Not saying globalization in itself is a bad thing or it has bad ends or anything like that. All I'm saying is a lot of what increased the propensity of the virus to spread was, people were traveling more. and global supply lines were more distributed, which means that when the pandemic hit and those supply lines got shut down, some countries had enough PPE and other countries didn't have nearly enough PPE. And some countries were able to produce vaccines quite effectively and administer them to their own citizens, and other countries weren't. And so if, it depends on what lessons those new bodies that they're talking about creating would learn from the course of the virus, because if they're doubling down on some of the same bad habits, or at least habits that were revealed as bad for handling this exact type of crisis, then that wouldn't be a good way to learn from it. And I somehow doubt I don't know, they're decent people, I guess, but I somehow doubt the minds of Boris Johnson. I take it back, they're not decent people. The minds of Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron, and Angela Merkel coming together and working this all out like magic. I'm more curious about what Xi Jinping would think after all his country did manage to handle this virus the most effectively. But there you go. And I agree, again, I sort of set this up, but I agree. It's a little bit silly and arguably potentially deleterious in the long run to compare this to World War II. This is not that same level of crisis. In national political news, the trial of Derek Chauvin began yesterday. The first witness at the trial was Jenna Scurry, a 9/11 dispatcher who was watching the events as they played out, saying that she had initially believed the cameras were frozen as she saw Chauvin with his knee pinned on Floyd's neck. She said that, quote, "My instincts were telling me that something was wrong. Something wasn't right. It was an extended period of time," end quote. After watching the events on the screen for several minutes, she reported the incident to the sergeant in charge of the officers, telling him she didn't, quote, "want to be a snitch," end quote, but describing the protracted and ultimately deadly period of detainment of George Floyd. Again, George Floyd's death sparked last summer's Black Lives Matter protests. Really, his death sparked them, but there were a number of deaths of Black individuals at the hands of police that year that, set people off, set it going. Ahmaud Arbery actually preceded it, but Floyd's death was the one that really set it off. Police in New York City are looking for a man who beat a 65-year-old Asian American woman who was on her way to church on Monday in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of the city. The man allegedly said, "F you," that's me, making it radio friendly, not actually what he said, "F you, you don't belong here," end quote, before punching and kicking the woman until she fell to the ground. While she was on the ground, he reportedly continued to kick her. This event is the latest reported hate crime against Asian Americans in a string of such high-profile events, as anti-Asian bias appears to be on the rise over the last year. Again, arguably not just due to Trump's claims that this is the Wuhan flu or the China virus, which in itself is pretty tinged with racism at the very least, but also, widespread U.S. antagonism towards China specifically, which has blowback effects not just on not just Chinese Americans, but also Asian Americans, of all origins. The number of Americans making trips in their cars has increased dramatically over recent weeks, with the number of daily passenger trips reaching pre-pandemic levels for the first time in a year. This according to data given to the Associated Press by a private firm. Larger cities like Los Angeles are seeing higher weekend traffic than during the week, as the economy has undergone a quick, radical shift in many cases from in-office work to remote work done from home. And when we were talking earlier on in the headlines about the higher case numbers, how new cases, the loads of new cases have been quite a bit higher than we were used to seeing. I can't help but think that kind of thing, that this is related. More folks are getting out of the home with the vaccines out. Even if you haven't got one, people are feeling a little bit more liberated to go and do what they want to. But the other side of that, of course, is if you're not actually safe, if you're engaging in things that aren't safe, well, then the cases go back up. Doesn't matter that we're at a cold and flu season, the virus still spreads. And I'm worried, as of course, I'm sure you are too, Jamarl, that we're going to see higher death loads not too long from now. Anywho, Major League
I already
Baseball
predicted that.
opening...
Worried.
Oh, yes.
I predicted that weeks ago. I mean...
Well, we've been talking about it for weeks. Months, technically. But no, that exactly.
Because it looked like it was going to go up. I mean, there were a few things. Like you said, the vaccine being out, people saying, hey, I got my vaccine. I don't want to be in the house. But also they're opening up the states. I mean, I don't know, but where you are in South Dakota, but here in Maryland, and they're starting to open this place up. In Florida, they're opening it up. Texas, they're opening it up. My wife is in Texas now. Apparently, they were out messing around. We're opening it up. They're opening the schools up. It had to go up. That number had to pump up a little bit. I mean, I could be wrong, but that was my thought, that with everything just kind of, people are sick of it. It's gonna be in the house.
Yes. People are tired of it and they want to get out, and I get it because I do too. But I mean, I'll put it like this: there are a few safer ways for people to get out and enjoy leisure time than whatever people are probably doing, which is often going to public credit events. Even here's the thing: the middle ground would be like meeting up with family, which yes, that increases the spread of the sickness. I have family members who are currently in the process of trying to get a vaccine, and I booked my first vaccine appointment, by the way, out here in South Dakota.
Did you? You found one? Excellent.
I did. I found one. That's for this coming Monday. I'm looking forward to having Wi-Fi built into my body and becoming a cyborg. I'm sure I get microchip. I'm just kidding. Just to be clear, I'm completely kidding. Yeah, I don't buy that stuff. But anyway, I have that set up. And here's the thing: I know family members who are trying to organize like social events post-vaccine. In other words, everybody gets the vaccine. You come out and hang out however many months from now, which I can see that making sense.
That's funny.
But anywho. There you go. Major League Baseball's opening day is Wednesday, tomorrow. Players and staffers currently aren't required to receive vaccines, but there are incentives encouraging them to do so. If the number of people vaccinated passes a threshold, players and staff would be able to gather in hotel rooms without face coverings, bring family members on the road during the season, and drop to 2 mandatory coronavirus tests during the week. In international news, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has told the U.S. mission to the United Nations that the United States needs to reconnect to other countries, saying that American alliances globally have not been nurtured, that was the word, and that his department has, quote, work to do as a department to rebuild trust and morale, end quote, saying that the United States needs to resume, quote, arguing persuasively to make our case, building coalitions with other countries, and outcompeting countries that seek to hold the UN back. End quote. What does seek to hold the UN back mean exactly? I don't know. It seems like we have tried in many cases. We've certainly are, with outsized voting power and other things, we've argued against the UN, specifically on the Security Council. On many cases, we've been the standout vote and plenty of votes. I don't know exactly what that means. In the situation with Cuba, are we holding them back? Are they holding us back? How do we view it as the latter? It's probably the former. Anyway, I don't know exactly what he means there, but I'm certainly worried about it. In the Suez Canal, salvage teams on Monday managed to free the Ever Given from its position athwart that canal, ending a shipping crisis that had shut down one of the world's most important waterways and halted billions of dollars a day worth of trade. A flotilla of tugboats worked with a high tide and onshore excavators to pull the bulbous bow out of the massive container ship out of its sandy mooring on the side of the canal. Experts and canal authorities say it could take between 3 and 10 days for the backlog of ships to clear the canal, and I've heard estimates ranging from $50 to $60 billion total American dollars in loss of trade just from this one ship screwing up. China has today passed sweeping changes to Hong Kong's electoral rules, cutting the number of directly elected seats in parliament almost in half, from 35 to 20, while expanding the total number of seats from 70 to 90, with members of parliament now undergoing a vetting process by Beijing. The aim of that vetting process is to ensure that quote-unquote patriotic figures enter parliament. The decision amends the annexes of Hong Kong's small constitution, the Basic Law. The United States Secretary of State has described the move as, quote, an assault on democracy, end quote. In Myanmar, the total death toll has risen to 510 at least, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. It's a human rights group monitoring the conflict. On Monday, people took to the streets in Kachin State, and in the Zhejiang region in the country's north, as well as in Dawei in the south. Many use a 3-finger salute, a gesture which has come to symbolize resistance to the military coup government which took power on February 1st, detaining the heads of state and members of the legislature. Saturday was the bloodiest day yet in the country, with 114 killed and attacks on a village near the border of Thailand, forcing upwards of 3,000 refugees to flee across the border into the neighboring Southeast Asian country. At the International Criminal Court, appeals judges are today ruling on an attempt made by the former Congolese militia leader Bosco Ntaganda to overturn his conviction and an accompanying sentence of 30 years for war crimes and crimes against humanity. His lawyers have asked for a retrial on appeal or for an acquittal, alleging that the original trial was erroneous. He was sentenced in 2019 for murder, rape, using child soldiers, and for other atrocities when in 2002 and 2003, he was the military chief of the Union of Congolese Patriots. That's a militia in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break. When we come back, we will be in our soapbox segment with Jamarl's monologue and a quick back and forth. Be right back.
Fault lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, if you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Joe Biden, at his last press conference, went into this kind of interesting flourish where he was talking about Xi Jinping of China. And he said, I know Xi. Him and I have had a conversation. We talked for hours. Doesn't have a democratic bone in his body. This is what Biden said. He said, and I told him that your country is not going to last. Your way of government is not going to last because your government demands the need of the people. It needs to have the will of the people. Now, Biden and the ridiculousness of this argument assumes that a government that is not necessarily a republic or not necessarily a democracy does not have the will of the people. If you pull 200 million or 300 million people out of poverty in 20 years, you will have the will of the people. And I'm telling you this, it doesn't entirely matter that they're not a democracy. They still, if you ask them, if you do polling, the government has the will of the people. And it's also somewhat of a weird assumption that just because something is a republic or democracy, that the will of the people is being enacted. That's a farce. Coming to that, or bringing us to that particular conclusion, or showing us that in this kind of experiential form, is Koch brothers, or one, trying to buy Congress. Why is he trying to buy Congress? Because he is concerned that the voting rights legislation, H.R. 1, that Democrats are pushing through, is going to expand the amount of people that vote. And what did I tell you the other day? We don't want everybody to vote. Our strength in the election goes up as the voting populace goes down. Heritage Foundation founder. That is the modus operandi of the party. They know this, and they operate on this. Whether they say it aloud or not, it is what they know. Koch brother here, trying to buy it, gets that across that much more plainly. Right here, this is Esquire.com, but this came out in the New Yorker. Jane Mayer, the author of Dark Money, gets her hand on a conference call and messages or leaks from a conference call that gets across that they are very concerned about this particular provision. And instead of dealing with this from the standpoint of the American public, instead of being able to just lie to the public, make the public believe things that aren't necessarily true, mix up the public with information and data and all of this other stuff, they realize that's not going to work. The public doesn't like billionaires buying off elections. And so what they decided to do was not focus on the public, focus on Congress. They can buy Congress. The public is different. Meaning they realize that they can't shape the point of view of the public on this legislation, because how do you argue that it is bad for more people to vote? Even if you try to attack AOC or say, hey, this is cancel culture, it doesn't quite work. And so the thought became, Screw the public. Let's just buy Congress. Funny part is, I'm not quite sure how that's different than normal. So the people in the meeting, this is Esquire. It says right here, the call between Cal McKenzie, apparently an appendage, as they call it, of the Coctopus, which also had congressional aides, advisor to Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and a list of aides from the Senate. Now, the House of Representatives has already passed this bill, and they put it into the Senate. The question becomes, what happens to this particular bill in the Senate? And with the filibuster and rules, you can imagine it has a tough way to go. I'm just going to read it. The speakers on the call expressed alarm at the broad popularity of the bill's provision, calling for more public disclosures about secret political donors. The participants conceded that the bill, which would stem the flow of dark money from such political donors as the billionaire oil magnate Charles Koch, was so popular that it wasn't worth trying to mount a public advocacy campaign to shift the opinion. Instead, a senior Koch operative said the opponents would be better off ignoring the will of American voters and trying to kill the bill in Congress. Again, how is this different than normal? Think back for the moment. Medicare for All has 70-something% approval, or 69-70% approval. You had the elimination of student debt that was up to 60-70% approval. You had the expansion of Social Security. I mean, there are a list of policies that are wildly popular from the standpoint of the American public if it was put up for a vote. It is not put up for a vote because it gets killed. Even $15 an hour minimum wage, wildly popular. If it gets put up for a vote, it gets killed because of various members of Congress that don't believe that the American worker deserves $15 an hour. I still don't quite understand why the Democratic Party and the Republican Party hate the American worker so, and yet here we are. Here's another passage. He related the AOC message we tested, one claiming that the bill might help Congresswoman AOC achieve her goals of holding, quote, people in the Trump administration accountable, unquote, by identifying big donors, help somewhat with conservatives. But the McKenzie admitted that the link was tenuous since, quote, what she means by it is unclear. Think about what they're talking about here. A quote from AOC, and their thought is, we're going to try to say that AOC is going to use this to go after Trump. And they said, but this only kind of works because we don't know what she meant. This is phenomenal. Yes, Congress spends 70% of their time begging for money. And if you're going to spend 70% of your time begging for money, of course, there are going to be certain consequences in regards to the people with means getting across their perspective of things. But this is very straightforward. Koch brothers working with Congress members to try to figure out how to stop a particular provision. If that doesn't bother you, I don't know what does. These guys are basically filling the FDR line. These people thought that the government was a mere appendage of their means of making profits. And maybe they're right, especially now, considering the conversations that are being had in Congress. Hey, we want to expand voting rights. Oh God, if we expand voting rights, they're going to adversely affect our ability to buy Congress members, especially in the way that they're trying to do it. You guys must stop that. This has nothing to do with the American public. That's the point I'm trying to get across. This is everything to do with dark money, wanting to remain dark money, to basically buy politicians, to prevent policies that are in the best interest of the American public, while expanding policies that are in the best interests of the moneyed interests. You don't think it's weird that tax cuts get passed year after year, Democratic or Republican president? You don't think it's weird that every time there's a crisis, the moneyed class makes out like bandits, even when programs are set up for the poor or for, let's say, just small businesses? Think back what happened during the coronavirus, when you had all of these businesses that went belly up as a result of government malfeasance. When they made a program to save those companies, what happened? The moneyed interests widened it a little bit, till you find out, after having to basically go through court, that most of the money that was supposed to go to small businesses to keep them afloat went to the rich. If you want to know why, It's this. Nothing that is taking place here in regards to this conversation is abnormal. That, if anything of this, is the scandal. It's that, not the individual or singular conversation. It's the point that this conversation is as normal as apple pie, that this back and forth between people of means, because what happens if they rebuke Koch? Think for the moment with the Democratic donor Klobuchar, where he gets on television confident and says he's not going to give it. They say the word billionaire again, that the Democratic Party is no longer going to get any of his money. Why does that matter? It matters because they need that cash, and he knows that that cash is the thing that allows him to influence that political party. Why do you think that the Republicans during Donald Trump's grotesque tax cut said our donors tell us that if we don't pass this tax cut, to lose their number? Again, exact same provision. You have moneyed interests telling them this is what we want. And if you want to continue to get our ends, you better do what we want. This is the credit card being run through the butt cheek of Congress members, for that matter, in order to get their complicity. But who are they supposed to be complicit to? Us or the money class? What did I say? You have dollars or you have pitchforks? And for the longest time, you have not had pitchforks. Shane, what do you think? This article by the Esquire, it's called, it's hard to top this as a case study in plutocratic contempt for the popular democracy. That's the name of the article. Because basically, they're saying, we can't win this in the public. So screw the public. Let's just buy Congress. What are your thoughts?
I mean, that doesn't sound good, but like you said, there has never been a case, at least not recently. There's not been a recent case where we have faced a major crisis and then the money dispersed in that crisis has gone to the people who actually needed it, which sounds a little bit like a libertarian argument coming from you, which leads me to question, why then push for more spending by Congress? Because I admit, and I agree, it is needed, but if, as you say, a lot of it is fat on the pork, in order to give money to people who already have it, if that's just built into it systemically, that doesn't seem good for people either. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a right way out of this. And I know you're going to push back on me in a fairly standard way, which is, well, people need money. But at the same time, like you just said, most of the money that gets given out in these bills tends to go to the people who already have it. And in the long run, of course, the worry is that that's just going to drag the American system under. The people who already have enough money are going to take their money overseas where they have safe havens. They'll be fine, but America will continue to suffer. What's your take on that?
So, I mean, it's a leaky bucket, right? And on some level, look, this is a game that's played, and it's played constantly. And the game is basically, you need something. You're dirt poor. You're hungry. You're whatever. I will give you 10 cents if I can make 90 cents. And your option on this is to starve and die in the street or accept the 10 cents. That's the position that you're always put in. I mean, even in many of the companies that people are working in, the employees, despite the fact that they are entirely necessary for that company to be anything, Jeff Bezos doesn't have a dollar to his name if those workers aren't making his factories, if they aren't selling his products, if they aren't building the code for those products, if they aren't building the street so people can drive there. You get my point. And so it's always that. I hate that, which is kind of why I point that out. But I don't know anything around that in this particular moment. And that's what I'm stuck with. It's like, I get not wanting these guys to get that cash. Lord knows you're absolutely right. And right now, Joe Biden, for example, is doing this nonsense where he's pushing through COBRA as opposed to something like a Medicare for all or a public option. And think about what that means. Think of all the money that's going to go to insurance companies as opposed to a public option where that money does not go to insurance companies. For that matter, they're not even putting price controls on the drugs, despite the fact that we help make the drugs. So, yeah, agree.
We are just about out of time. We got a hard break here that we got to close out of. But the conversation we'll come back to later. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines. lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joe Biden wins in Georgia. Shocking in and of itself that a Democrat wins in Georgia. Asif Warnock win in Georgia. Yes. I'll give you $2,000 if you put me in office. And they put those Democrats in office, and they won for the first time in my lifetime that I'm aware of in a runoff. So what do if you're the Republican Party? You just lost Georgia, of all places. Georgia, you can't even depend on Georgia. Do you go and you change your policies, something that you do in a representative government when you no longer represent the people in your particular district? Do you go and do the hard work of changing to make sure that you represent them? No. You figure out the problem. The problem is that there are too many black people voting in Georgia, and those people are putting people in office that we don't particularly like. And I'm being hyperbolic here. The issue is more on the political part, but still, for all intents and purposes, the effects of some of the new laws that they've just passed in Georgia, some of the most restrictive in the country, are taking place. And I would make the argument that they're doing that as a reaction to Asif, Warnock, and Biden barely with the skin of their teeth winning the state. To have a conversation about the new voting laws that they're passing in Georgia, we're joined by Greg Palast, best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reporting for the BBC, The Guardian, The Rolling Stones. He's also bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Greg, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us on such short notice.
Glad to be back.
Absolutely. So Georgia passes restrictive voting laws. Now, what's interesting about the way they've done this is that Kemp has basically argued, look, there was no cheating in Georgia. However, a lot of people believe it, and Donald Trump said it, and we need to make sure that people know that our elections are safe. And so we need to pass these voting laws. That's basically how he sold these laws. But just so we're clear, can you tell us about what these laws do? Are these laws really entire to make people safe? I mean, they get to the point of saying you can't even give people water. It's a criminal offense to give people water. What are the laws that these guys are passing? And are these laws really passed to make people safe, or are these laws passed to assist Republicans in staying in office?
Let's start with this. The only person who's safe is Jim Crow under these new laws. Look, the state of Georgia has been a blue state for the 8 years I've been covering Georgia for Rolling Stone, Al Jazeera, and The Guardian. 8 years ago, Martin Luther King III said, this is a blue state. So it's not a shock to me that it went blue. In fact, 8 years ago, I put Stacey Abrams and Reverend Warnock, now Senator Warnock, on national TV for the first time. They're saying, look, this is, by the way, Georgia as of this year, if the census numbers come out honestly, is now a majority state. White people are in the minority. It's not surprising that it went Democratic. It's very simple. The issue is simple. Will you let people vote? And in Georgia, they do everything to stop it. And this didn't just begin with this so-called this new restrictive, what Joe Biden calls the new Jim Crow law of Georgia. And so let me enumerate a few things. I'm the reporter that broke the fact that it's a felony crime in Georgia. By the way, it already was. They just strengthened it. A felony crime in Georgia to hand someone pizza or a bottle of water. Because I mentioned pizza, and I started with that. That's been picked up because I saw this crime committed. If you go to gregpalast.com, you can see a little film of me in Cobb County where you have the criminal Papa John's pizza pushing gang handing out calzones. That's pocket pizzas for those of you in South Dakota. And pocket pizzas and bottles of water. And I asked them, are you bribing voters? This is a felony crime. You can go to jail for a minimum of 1 year in Georgia for handing someone a calzone while they're standing in line or water. Now, that's the beginning. But you have to understand why there are 3 and 4 and 6 and 8 and 12-hour lines in Georgia in African-American areas, Hispanic, and in Asian-American neighborhoods. They're the new group under attack. So, for example, in Cobb County, where I took this film of Papa John's trying to feed the starving citizens illegally, Cobb County had 11 early voting stations. That's it for 500,000 people in a big county that includes a hunk of Atlanta. But when Biden won Cobb County, and understand this is Newt Gingrich's district, this is right-wing Republican turf, yet Biden won with the massive number of new non-white voters. So they closed 6 of the 11 early voting stations, all 6 in the African-American neighborhoods, requiring Black folk to drive as far as 20 miles. We met some people who showed up at their polling station and had to drive 20 miles to the white polling station. So, of course, now the lines are massive. And now they're going to make this worse. In Georgia, like in most places, most people mailed in their ballots because of the virus. But America's been moving to majority mail-in ballots already. We already were 30% before the virus. So a lot of states, including Georgia, and especially in Fulton County and the Atlanta area, they put out drop boxes because no one can or should trust the post office to get your ballot in on time. I had one gentleman who mailed in his ballot 10 days early and it was still marked late. So they have drop boxes which are picked up every night by the elections board. What they've done now is say they've eliminated 2/3 of the drop boxes under this new law. They've also said you can't drop off your ballot in the drop box, at any time. It can only be during business hours. The whole point of a drop box so people can do it after work. And by the way, it's not like it's insecure. There are video cameras on these boxes. They're highly secure. And no one has said that a single vote in a drop box was illegal. Not a single vote. Yet they're removing these drop boxes. So once again, you're going to have massive lines. They're cutting out, while they didn't cut out all souls to the polls days, they restricted the hours of weekend voting in Georgia. And of course, that's when most African Americans and Hispanics vote on what generally called souls to the polls days, because people don't have cars, especially older people. So they go in the church van after church. They have to stop that. So they stop that. Again, that brings lines longer. There are many other things which I am about to write about. If you go to gregpalast.com, watch that spot because I'll be putting out a news story on new hidden horrors besides no pizza, making pizza a felony. 2 other things that I noticed. By the way, the bill is 95 pages long. I haven't gotten through it all. Every page is a new horror show. It looks like Stephen King wrote it. It's horrifying. So terrifying. But one of the things is that any voter, are you ready for this? Any voter in Georgia can challenge any other voter's right to vote in Georgia. Literally.
Wow.
So I don't that guy with the kind of, dark skin, he shouldn't vote. And it says that there is no limit to the number of people you can challenge. Now, why is this important? This ain't theoretical. Last year in the general election and and this year in the runoff in Georgia, I was down there, and go to gregpalast.com. You'll see tons of my reports out of Georgia, and for Democracy Now! and other outlets. You had a group called True the Vote, which was mass challenging voters of color. 20,000 voters in a single county they challenged on whatever cockamamie grounds. Now, all these things were thrown out by local elections boards and courts saying, number one, there's a limit to the number of voters you can challenge. You have to know who that voter is. You can't just say, I don't like Shane Stranahan here, your producer. He can't vote. Well, do you know Shane? No. Do you know why he can't vote? Have you ever met him? Well, how do you know he's an illegal voter? So what they did was they used ways of figuring out it's not that difficult to figure out who were the voters they didn't like. We know people's registration. We certainly know their color on their neighborhoods. And they challenged in one county 20,000 voters and so that was thrown out. So they did 2 things. One, they made it legal to mount these challenges. They say, big deal. Then the voter just has to go into a hearing. It's like you've been hauled into court on the basis of no evidence. And if you don't show up to this, take a day off work and show up because some white supremacist has tagged Jesse Jackson and said you can't vote, and you say, oh, no, I can vote. And then they say, okay, well, you can vote. Well, excuse me. You just lost a day of work, and that's not everyone who is being targeted, and it's been racial. In addition, they used to leave that up to the elections boards to determine if a challenge was reasonable. And I have to say, in due credit to some of the local boards, a lot of the local commissioners said, you can't challenge these voters. These are our neighbors. You have no basis for this. We don't have any illegal voters here. And so even Republican-controlled boards began to reject these challenges. So what has the legislature done? It says that the local boards no longer have the final say. It will now be up to the state elections board. And the state elections board, they've removed the Secretary of State. They've removed independent members of the board. The board will now be made up of the legislative leaders of Georgia, who are the MAGA maggots. They're basically Trump stormtroopers. There's no other way to put it. And they will be in charge of determining if those 20,000 people in a single county can be challenged. That's just, and like I say, it's 95 pages long. That's just the highlights of the horror show.
So while a lot of national media has been focused on the call between Trump and our Attorney General for Georgia, what you're saying is there is a deeper crime here. There's a deeper problem going on, and you see this in the bill that was recently passed in the state of Georgia. I mean, you brought up a few of the key highlights here. Here's where I would go with this. We only have a couple minutes left in this segment. We're going to be coming back with you in the next. Voting rights and allegations of voting fraud and election fraud more generally are more significant issues, I would say, now at this point in American politics than they ever have been before. To the point where literally earlier this year, inaugurating this year, after, just a few weeks before the actual presidential inauguration, you saw an unprecedented riot, breach of the Capitol, insurrection, whatever word you want to use to define that event, which was manned by people, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands even of people who thought that there are serious electoral abnormalities in terms of rampant voter fraud. That is the call from the right. For a long time, I've heard calls from the left that there is widespread abuses of voter rights. If you had to explain to somebody, and I want to come back to this on the other side of this break, if you had to explain to somebody who was in the center or was on the right wing even, what are they getting wrong here? If you had to make the case that there are far more abuses of people's right to vote than there are fraudulent voters, how would you focus that argument? What case would you make, Greg, in our couple minutes here?
Okay, let's distinguish two things, really important. There's voter fraud, that is voters committing these frauds, black people voting twice. And, there's a program called Interstate Crosscheck, which accused literally 1 million black people of voting twice. And Georgia used that program to eliminate voters. And that's also, by the way, in the new law, this new mass purge program. That's voters committing that crime. But you know what? They don't. Georgia removed all these people from the voter rolls on grounds that they were registered in 2 states. In fact, not 1, 0. There was also, they said that people were moving because were voting who lived in other states, including, for example, I was with Christine Jordan, 92 years old when she went to vote for Stacey Abrams. She was thrown out of the polling station, 92 years old, because they said she no longer lived in Atlanta, so she was an illegal voter. So I went to the home of this criminal voter, and there was Martin Luther King's picture on the wall at that house, having dinner with her, so which means that she had to be there at least a half a century. So that's voter fraud, and it doesn't exist. And that's what Trump is claiming. People filling out ballots illegally, Hugo Chavez coming back from the grave and mailing in millions of mail-in ballots, all that nonsense. But what's real is vote suppression. That's when the voters are defrauded by the state, removing Mrs. Jordan from the voter rolls, closing voting stations in the African-American neighborhoods, disregarding and rejecting absentee ballots because they claim 54% of the ballots that were rejected for so-called signature mismatch were cast by African-Americans. So let me again distinguish. There is voter fraud, voters committing fraud. That's the Trump line. That's the right-wing line. And you know what? Where are these illegal voters? If you show them to me, I'll arrest them myself.
Got to go into a break. For those listening, we are joined by Greg Palast, best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reports for BBC, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. You can follow Greg's work, by the way, on Twitter at Greg_Palast and also on his website, gregpalast.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, but we'll be back in just a minute with Greg. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are talking.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold. Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we've been having a conversation about voting. I want to go back to 1980 by a gentleman named Paul Weyrich, founder of the Republican think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and ALEC. He gives this fiery speech. I don't want everybody to vote. Our leverage in the election goes up as the voting populace goes down. Think about that. He's arguing that basically his ability to win an election goes up as the number of people to vote go down. I want less people to vote. And an exhaustive study found, I need to find the year for this, but they found that they only found 10 cases of voter fraud out of 600 million votes cast. Think about that. Now, Republicans and the laws that these guys are passing are disenfranchising thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of voters all across the United States as these guys pass these laws. And yet, 10 cases and 600 million votes. The gentleman that we have with us was one of the people who sued Brian Kemp, and I kind of want to get into that. Greg Palast. Now, Greg Palast is a best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reporting for the BBC, The Guardian, and The Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, and you can follow Greg on Twitter at Greg Palast and on his website, gregpalast.com. Check out that website. Greg has all sorts of work there, and good work. I followed your site for a while now, Greg. Thank you. Greg, welcome to the show. Well, welcome back, I should say.
I'm glad to be back with you.
Absolutely. You sued Governor Kemp.
Yes.
And I want to make the point, and the reason why I read that and went back in history, because I wanted to make the point that this is American as apple pie. This is something that has taken place for a very long time. You've had Republicans that argued when Obama was running against Mitt Romney. I think the gentleman from Pennsylvania, that voter ID laws is going to help Mitt Romney win Pennsylvania for the first time in God knows how many years. It's like, whoa, that's a slip of the tongue. Like these laws, these things that they were putting in place was basically to shave off, either eliminate from the voting rolls or find ways to mitigate just percentages. I mean, look how much Biden won Georgia. It was just a few percentage points. If you do policy that you know is going to shave off just 1 or 2%, that is all you need to win that state. Am I wrong, Greg?
You've got it, unfortunately, exactly right. And yes, I've not only sued Brian Kemp, who was Secretary of State and now and swiped his way into the governor's office, but his successor, Brad Raffensperger. By the way, it's not Raffensperger, as everyone mispronounced it. Really is. His name really is Purger, and he's been purging the role.
Thank you.
He was born to
the
this
correction.
job. Now let's go through a couple of things. Why did I sue? I'm a journalist. And they were locking up their records. Now, I'm an investigative journalist, you can tell by the hat. And so what I was able to do was get out of Brian Kemp's office internal documents working through. I've got a team in there, and I want to thank Zach D. Roberts especially for basically being able to we don't do anything illegal. We just talk them out of insiders into giving us internal documents. And what we found is that the state of Georgia was using a system, Chris Kobach of Kansas. Now, Chris Kobach of Kansas, if you can't remember the name, just think KKK, came up with this list of people he said were voting twice. Now, how does he know people are voting twice? That's a go to jail crime. And how many people? He had 7.3 million suspects on the list, including half a million so-called double voters in Georgia. 1 in 12 voters. But interestingly, not just anyone. The names were suspiciously Jackson and Rodriguez and Garcia. How did they create this list? They simply said, Jose Garcia is voting in Kansas. Jose Garcia is voting in Georgia. They obviously must be the same person. John Black is voting in Michigan, and John Black is voting in Georgia. So obviously, John Black is the same voter voting twice. Even though, by the way, when I got a hold of the internal list, 2 million names had mismatched middle names. 250,000 matched, for example, James Brown Jr. and James Brown Sr. And we had 3,500 Michael Jacksons. Now, you might, I'm not kidding you. And you say, well, Michael Jackson's just a common name. Not for a Republican. Okay, so you're getting the idea. 85 of the 100 most common last names in America, according to the census, 85 of 100 are minority names like Rodriguez, Kim, Ho, Chung, Jackson, Washington. That's what the the history of slavery and the history of immigration is, that the minorities have common names. And so they remove the common names, that is minority voters, and that's how you win elections. Now, remember, you said Biden won by a couple of percent, a couple hundredths of a percent, 12,000 votes. If they had been able to purge 12,000 more voters, Biden would have lost Georgia. And they used the same system, by the way, in Wisconsin. He only won Wisconsin. So he won Georgia, Biden, by 12,000. He won Wisconsin by less than 20,000. And I got to tell you that so we sued in Georgia. When I say we, I sued with the Reverend Joseph Lowry's organization. He passed away, is the Campaign for New Georgia. And we sued, and now, and we were able to we won in federal court. In fact, he had to pay my lawyers their fees. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kemp. We beat him in federal court, saying you have to open your files. That's what I need as a journalist, not just what I can sneak out of your office. Open your files. They're the public files. You're removing voters. So we won that case and got the information. Now, Black Voters Matter has filed a lawsuit based on what we then found. And what we found was that they have removed 198,135 voters exactly. We have their names and addresses of people, like I mentioned earlier, a Mrs. Jordan, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin, people that they said moved out of Georgia, moved out of Atlanta, and they never moved anywhere. They're still in their homes. 200,000 people. So we're back in court. And this is before the new law. The new law allows more purges, more challenges, more games. But to say that they suddenly panicked and now they're putting in Jim Crow laws, no. You have to understand that the teeny margin of Joe Biden and the small margins of Warnock and Ossoff are only small because they illegally removed 200,000 voters, because they closed voting stations, because they rejected mail-in ballots, because they passed out what are called provisional ballots like candy to African-American voters, and which then were disqualified. So Jim Crow in Georgia and in many other states above the Mason-Dixon line. Let me tell you, we did a report for Black Voters Matter in Wisconsin challenging the removal of 135,000 voters. But here's the good news there. The bipartisan election board agreed with us, and they did not. They reversed the removal of the 135,000 voters that they said had moved. We went through name by name. We hired the top experts in address verification, including an agency called the United States Post Office. They know where you live, okay? They know where you live. And they said 100,000 of these people never moved. But they were guilty of voting while Black in Milwaukee or voting while student in Madison. If we hadn't been able, if that purge of voters had gone through, Joe Biden would not be president. He would have lost Wisconsin. If we hadn't blocked them in Georgia, he would have lost Georgia. And they had similar purges in Arizona. I'm telling you, if it weren't for the voting rights groups fighting like crazy, including ours, exposing things and working, and and by the way, that my report was issued by the ACLU of Georgia. If it weren't for the ACLU, if it weren't for Black Voters Matter, if it weren't for the Reverend Joseph Lowry's organizations and other fighting groups, and of course, Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight, I did work with Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight once she was no longer a candidate. I don't do partisan stuff. If it weren't for these groups, Biden would not be president. That is the vote. And it's not whether I'm for Joe Biden. I wasn't there to campaign for Biden. I was there to say, let the voters make the choice. If the voters choose Trump, hey, that's democracy. But they didn't want the voters to choose. They wanted Jim Crow to choose. And that's why we sued. And that's why we're still in federal court with Kemp's henchman replacement, Brad Raffensperger, who's been, by the way, played as some type of phony hero because he released the tapes of Donald Trump muscling him to try to find more votes. You have to understand, this guy already stole a bunch of votes for Trump. He just couldn't steal any more without going to prison.
Let me ask you this. It's something that I've always been curious about. It doesn't make sense to me, or maybe it does. I don't know. Why don't they challenge the election when it seems like the election is dodgy? So, for example, you had a situation where Hillary Clinton in Wisconsin, and they wait and let Jill Stein challenge the election in Wisconsin as opposed to Hillary Clinton challenging the election. It seems like it should matter. I mean, even if you look back at Al Gore, refuses to challenge Florida, like talking about this kind of full-throated pushback. It just, even Sanders, like the weirdness that was taking place within the context of the primary in the first 2016 election, they never pushed back on that. And I get it's a hot rail, but it's a hot rail to a certain extent. At a certain point, you're failing your voters, and the people who are backing you up, you don't necessarily look at that and say, okay, that looks a little dodgy.
There's a civil war within the Democratic Party. There's basically two parties. There's the white Democratic Party and there's the black Democratic Party. These are two parties. They're not the same. And in fact, in the South, they used to have a different name. They actually were called the Freedom Democrats for years. And so you have to understand this internal war. The white Democratic Party, for example, in Michigan, you talk about Wisconsin, Michigan, in the Hillary Clinton race. Hillary Clinton lost Michigan supposedly by 10,700 votes. However, 75,000 votes were never counted in Detroit because machines broke down. They could have been counted by hand, and that's what Jill Stein did. She paid for the hand recount until it was stopped by Donald Trump's lawyers. If they had counted all the votes, in other words, they took the votes kicked out by the bad machines and just looked at who they started the recount, I busted that story for Democracy Now! And so why wasn't Hillary Clinton there? Why was it Jill Stein of the Green Party, who, by the way, Hillary Clinton called a Russian agent? Hey, Hillary, how many Russian agents do you know are trying to save you the election? Okay, well, they say Jill Stein was trying to save the election over not only the silence of the Democratic Party, but this year, believe it or not, this year, when the Palast Investigative Fund, that's my foundation, when we and Black Voters Matter put up a list of voters in Michigan whom the Republican secretaries of state, the Republicans, when they controlled the state, had removed a couple 100,000 voters illegally. We put up the list so that you could re-register. Hey, re-register. And we were shut down by the Democratic Secretary of State and the Democratic Attorney General saying, you are disparaging Michigan elections. Yeah, I'm disparaging Michigan elections. They're Jim Crow elections. I know you don't want that. The white Democratic Party does not want black control out of Detroit of their party. They want just enough to win. But you know what? Even if they lose the presidential slot, they don't want to lose control of their party. There's a fear of a black party, and that's just the truth of it. So you have within the Democratic Party a great deal of resistance to the power of the black vote. Stacey Abrams was internally vilified by the Democratic Party, not supported, vilified.
I do remember
she helped carry Georgia against the will of the Democratic Party. They'd given up. Now, I will say somehow, maybe because he's got Kamala Harris, I don't know what it is, but kind of Joe Biden's joined the black party, the black Democratic Party. This week, I got to say, you can't complain.
That's a phenomenal rundown in regards to an explanation of what is taking place, especially in Georgia and especially within the context of the party and your work on this. So thank you. Greg Palast is best-selling author, journalist, best known for the investigative reports for the BBC, The Guardian, The Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. You can follow Greg's work on Twitter at Greg_Palast, and there's a website, gregpalast.com. Check out that website. The website is awesome. Greg, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the radically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Whoa, all of a sudden I got a massive thing of feedback. And I'm not quite sure where this is coming from.
Couldn't hear it on our end. So there you go.
You say you did?
Did not. So you're good to go.
Oh, that sucks. Okay. All right, that's off-putting. Let's go through it though. At least 685 new coronavirus deaths and 70,265 new cases were reported in the United States on March 29th. Over the past week, there's been an average of 65,385 cases per day, an increase of 19% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Tuesday morning, more than 30,355,300 people in the United States have been infected with coronavirus, and over 549,000 have died from the virus. In a joint letter, French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel have called for the creation of a new global treaty for pandemics, warning that the future of pandemics are inevitable and that the coronavirus has been a, quote, stark and painful reminder that nobody is safe until everybody is safe, unquote. Describing the coronavirus as, quote, the biggest challenge to the global community since the 1940s, unquote. They said that a union like the one formed in post-World War era is needed now to meet the demands imposed on the global community by the coronavirus. You mean like a European Union or like a League of Nations, or what's the word I'm looking for? United Nations? Is that what you were saying? Meaning, I'm being tongue-in-cheek here, but there seems to be so many organizations already. Do you really need another one? Can one that you already have be refashioned, remodeled, and be purposed for this very specific purpose of going through and dealing with people with COVID-19, or for that matter, pandemics in the future? I hope you get my point. It seems like there are already so many bodies. I mean, what is the point of the European Union if it's not to marshal and organize issues like this? I hope you get my point. What is the point of the United Nations if it's not to unite the nations for global issues? I don't know. It's not that I hate it or am entirely against it. It's just it feels like there's so many institutions already that one of the other institutions could take it. But look, I'm not entirely against it. There will be future pandemics. So yeah, I don't want to just attack it. The trial of Derek Chauvin began yesterday. Two witnesses at the trial. The first witness at the trial was Jen Scurry, a 9/11 dispatcher who was watching the events as they played out, saying that she had initially believed the cameras were frozen as she saw Chauvin with his knee pinned on Floyd's neck. Quote, my instincts were telling me that something was wrong, something wasn't right, unquote, said Scurry. Quote, it was an extended period of time, unquote. After watching the events on the screen for several minutes, she reported the incident to the sergeant in charge of officers, telling him she didn't want to be a snitch, but describing the protracted and ultimately deadly period of detainment. She didn't want to be a snitch. A snitch to who? On who? I mean, what was this? Criminal. God, that's such a weird statement. This is not Boom Boom and Joe Boy. And Joe Boy is like, I saw Boom Boom steal a Reese's Pieces from the Utotem, and I don't know if I should be a snitch and tell. That's not that. You're watching one man basically murder another man in live broad daylight. And the people who were there on the scene could not get that man to deviate from that murder. The other cops at the scene didn't care that he was committing that murder. And the dispatcher had to get over her feelings of being a snitch to say, hey, that cop that has a philosophical responsibility to keep that man safe, by the way. Meaning, it's not just that the cop has this maximum justice at any moment. That cop is also supposed to keep that individual safe that he is bringing in. It is not his right, his responsibility to all of a sudden turn around and murder the guy when the guy gets aggravating, or for that matter, to flagrantly disregard radical distress. And yet, it's normal. So much so that the other cops standing by didn't think anything was weird at all. Neither did Chauvin. Chauvin, for all intents and purposes, could have been drinking coffee in the way that he had that needle in his throat and murdered that man. Police in New York City are looking for a man who beat a 65-year-old Asian American woman, who was on her way to church on Monday in Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of the city. The man allegedly said, "F you, you don't belong here," before punching and kicking the woman until she fell to the ground. This event is the latest reported hate crime against Asian Americans in a string of such high-profile events and anti-Asian bias that appears to be on the rise over the last several years. It's not appears to be, it is on the rise, empirically so. And in the context of it empirically being on the rise, that person should be charged with a hate crime, full stop. Put him under the prison for all I care. And I don't mean off the guy or anything like that. It's just a figure of speech. I'm just making the point that if you're willing to beat a 65-year-old anybody on their way to pretty much anywhere short of some kind of execution where they're killing somebody, then yeah, you should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Look, the problems that are associated with this stuff, we have a hard time dealing with this stuff at the end point. Meaning, if the president is going to get out and scream that Asians are the problem, if their new president is going to get out saying Asians are committing genocide, meaning the Chinese are committing genocide, it doesn't matter that Joe Biden is saying, oh, I repudiate the crimes and blah, blah, blah. If you're screaming that the Chinese are committing genocide, then you are no better than the previous president. Despite the fact that the previous president was screaming about the China virus, you are saying something even worse. This is politics in the way that America has run its affairs, and the way the public is acting is just a reflection of what the political space and the media space has been feeding to it for the past 20-something years. It's not magic. The public didn't get it out of nowhere. The public got it from what was being invested into it. Full stop. The number of Americans making trips in their cars has increased dramatically over the recent weeks, with the number of daily passenger trips reaching pre-pandemic levels for the first time in a year. This according to data given to the Associated Press by a private firm. Larger cities like Los Angeles are seeing higher weekend traffic than during the week, as the economy has undergone a quick, radical shift, in many cases from in-office work to remote work done from home. The question is, do companies allow those employees to remain working from home? The employees or the employer, the excuse used to be, well, we can't afford to let employees work from home because we can't trust that those employees will be doing the job. And yet, when this particular event hit, what happened? They were perfectly okay with those people working the job as opposed to those businesses just shutting down entirely. How do you make the excuse now that you need those people back into the office when you were able to pursue your affairs, make your profits with those people working remotely and being able to have some semblance of a life outside of the office? That radical shift should remain. That's the point that I'm making. People were able to have somewhat of a life. You have people with kids, you have people with dogs, you have people with family members that need assistance. And in this very specific situation with the coronavirus besieging the population, despite 500,000 people dying, despite 30 million people being infected, the changeover doesn't necessarily mean that all of that changeover attributes were negative. And that aspect of people, when they could stay at home, I would argue, is positive. Some semblance of a normal life is not a negative thing. Major League Baseball opening day on Wednesday. Players and staffers currently aren't equipped to receive vaccines, but there are incentives encouraging them to do so. If the number of people vaccinated passes a threshold, players and staff will be able to gather in hotel rooms without face coverings, bring family members to the road during the season, and drop to 2 mandatory coronavirus tests during the week. Very nice. We are going back to the office pretty soon. Shane, you said that you have a coronavirus test scheduled coming up, right? So you will be back into the office also.
Hang on, take over for a second.
Oh, my bad.
I randomly, oh man. You can hear it. For some reason, I cannot talk all of a sudden. Please take over.
No worries. No, you're fine. You're fine. So let's keep going. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has told United States missions to the United Nations that the United States need to reconnect to other countries, saying that American alliances globally have not been nurtured. And this is, and his department has, quote, work to do as a department to rebuild trust and morale, unquote, saying that the United States need to resume, quote, arguing persuasively to make our case, building coalitions with other countries and outcompeting countries that seek to hold the United Nations back. I have no idea who he is talking about holding the United Nations back. The United States is literally sanctioning the International Criminal Court. And from the standpoint of holding the United Nations back, I don't know who he's talking about. I would say this, though. If you want to build relationships, food versus bombs seems to be a better way of doing that. And the next guest that is going to come on in the next 20 minutes or so is going to talk about the Silk Road Initiative and how China has been able to basically ingratiate itself to the various countries across the world, not with an iron fist, but more so with silk and, investment. So
it's the one there. I have my voice. I don't know what happened there. I swallowed wrong or something. The One Belt One Road initiative, or One Belt One Road, the New Belt and Road project, which is a kind of an attempt to revive both the historical memory and some of the reality of the Silk Road. Yeah, we'll be talking with them. And yes, I have a vaccine appointment, not just a test, but a vaccine appointment scheduled for this Monday, coming Monday. And are you there? I think you might have muted yourself, Jamarl.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a great idea. You're basically going around the world and offering investment. And that investment, we'll talk to him about it. I mean, I just think it's a phenomenal policy. It's almost like a Marshall Plan, Chinese version of a Marshall Plan. And yeah, on some level, Blinken is hitting on something that we've gotten away from something. And Hillary Clinton even was making the point of saying, hey, we need more vaccine diplomacy by giving away our vaccines, as opposed to other countries that were doing just that, specifically China and specifically Russia. Salvage teams on Monday managed to free the Ever Given from its position in the Suez Canal, ending a shipping crisis that has shut down one of the world's most important waterways and halted billions of dollars a day worth of trade. A flotilla of tugboats worked with the high tide and onshore excavators pull the bulbous bow of the massive container ship out of its sandy mooring on the side of the canal. Experts and canal experts say it would take 3 to 10 days for the backlog of ships to clear the canal. That was a weird accident. Probabilities, man, on any random day. It's like if you said over 300 years, would there be a situation where a ship ends up blocking the canal? Your answer is going to be yes. More likely than not, yes. If you can nail the day, no. No. And yet, here we are. Somebody would have won the lotto that day. Let's get one more. China has today passed sweeping changes to Hong Kong's electoral rules, cutting the number of directly elected seats in parliament almost in half, from 35 to 20, while expanding the total number of seats from 70 to 90, with members of parliament now undergoing a vetting process by Beijing. The aim of the vetting process is to ensure that patriotic figures enter parliament, and patriotic is in quotes. The decision amends the annexes of Hong Kong's small constitution, the Basic Law. The United States Secretary of State has described the move as an assault on democracy. Unquote. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Those are your headlines. We'll be back in a moment. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
No, Carl.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
we can't give you that. But we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back, and we are currently not speaking with a guest. We're working on bringing our guest on. Would have been a new guest talking about the Silk Road and the One Belt, One Road project, China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a big deal and something we've mentioned pretty frequently in the past because, of course, it is a core plank of China's foreign policy and to some extent its domestic policy going forward into this century. We'll try to come back to the conversation soon. Real quick, the bulb is. I was looking into this. You can't see it on a lot of ships because it's below water. Basically, that is what was stuck. The ship that ever given that was stuck in the Suez Canal. If you look at pictures of it, you can see the excavators are excavating around this sort of. You build it specifically to fit whatever ship you're building, and it is built to reduce that turbulence.
Oh, very cool. No, I understand. It's just a weird for that boat to get stuck. That's all. It's just very strange. I'm trying to fix the sound thing. I mean, I know you don't hear it, but it's like an echo. I'm hearing a severe echo on my end. That's a little off-putting.
I think folks on your YouTube can hear it too, because you got your own audio running over there. Anywho, yeah, I'm getting my vaccine this coming Monday. I am kind of looking forward to that. Got that appointment scheduled. In my case, I don't know if this will help you. I had had tried to get an appointment scheduled in both South Dakota and in Washington D.C. because we're heading back in there pretty soon. We want to get back to the studio here, and for like days, I haven't heard back from either of them. In South Dakota specifically, I hadn't heard back from any. Busy. Turns out next week, Monday, works just fine. So right after the show's over, I'm heading over to a clinic to get vaccinated, and I am looking forward to that. And also, heads up for folks, I'm not going to be on the show this Friday. Jamarl's hosting that solo. Since we're heading back into the studio pretty soon, I'm taking a day off really the weekend off, to go hang out with my brother and go on a little remote bike tour thing. So that should be fun, and I can give a brief report when I get back. It's been a while since I've done that kind of thing, and I'm looking forward to it.
That should be a lot of fun.
Anywho, it should be. It should be. And you know what? Since we're in what appears to be an open segment right now, if you want to call in, you can. 202-521-1320. Hope everybody is having a good day/weekend. It's a good day/week. Again, 202-521-1320 is the number to call. We've got about 10 minutes here, and then we're going to be going into our sort of expansion of our interview from yesterday with KJ No, talking about what's going on in Myanmar, the different ethnic militias, what they're doing, and their relationship with foreign powers, including China and the United States. As again, Myanmar